The announcement that nobody saw coming has just turned the entire Samurai Japan camp completely upside down. What was supposed to be a routine roster announcement for Japan's Miami expedition became the most explosive and emotionally charged moment of the entire 2026 World Baseball Classic. Within minutes of manager Ibata stepping in front of the media and officially reading out the names of the players selected to travel to Miami for the knockout rounds, the Samurai Japan locker room descended into chaos. A bat was smashed. Voices were raised. And then came the moment that stopped everyone cold. Shohei Ohtani, the man who never loses his composure, the leader who always puts the team above everything else, slammed his hand on the table and delivered an ultimatum that left manager Ibata and the entire Japanese baseball organization scrambling for answers. If they don't change the decision, I won't play again. This is the full story of what happened, who was left out of the Miami roster, why Kondo Kensuke reacted in a way that shocked his teammates, and why Ohtani's ultimatum has now thrown Japan's entire World Baseball Classic campaign into serious jeopardy. When manager Ibata first took charge of Samurai Japan ahead of the 2026 World Baseball Classic, he promised the Japanese public and the baseball world that his decisions would always be based on one thing and one thing only: performance. He said that no player, regardless of their reputation, their status, or their history with the national team, would be guaranteed a place in the lineup or on the roster simply because of their name. Every spot on this team would be earned, and every decision made by management would be aimed at giving Japan the best possible chance of winning the WBC title. At the time, those words were widely praised. Fans and analysts alike applauded Ibata's commitment to meritocracy and his willingness to make tough decisions without being influenced by sentiment or politics. It seemed like exactly the kind of strong, decisive leadership that Samurai Japan needed to compete at the highest level and bring the World Championship back to Japan. But when those same principles were applied to the Miami expedition roster announcement, the reaction inside the Samurai Japan camp was anything but applause. Because the two players that manager Ibata officially left out of the Miami roster were not fringe players, not players on the edge of the squad, and not players whose exclusion could be easily explained away with statistics or form. They were key players. Players with enormous respect within the group. Players whose absence from the roster felt, to many inside the camp, not like a calculated tactical decision, but like a deeply personal betrayal. The announcement itself was delivered by manager Ibata at a formal press conference held at the team hotel. The atmosphere in the room was already tense, as rumors had been circulating within the camp for several hours that significant changes were coming to the roster. Players had been speaking quietly among themselves, coaches had been holding closed-door meetings, and the general mood throughout the Samurai Japan facility had been one of nervous uncertainty. When Ibata finally stepped to the podium and began reading the names of the players selected for the Miami expedition, the room listened in silence. Name after name was called. Each selection was met with quiet nods and careful attention from the assembled media. And then, as the list drew toward its conclusion, it became increasingly clear that two names had not been called. Two names that everyone in that room had fully expected to hear. Two names that represented some of the most experienced and respected presences within the Samurai Japan squad. The press conference ended. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, back in the locker room, all hell broke loose. Kondo Kensuke was the first to react. And his reaction was one that nobody who witnessed it will ever forget. Kondo has been one of the most beloved and respected players in Japanese professional baseball for many years. His 4 on-base percentage titles, his legendary bat control, his ability to read pitchers and work counts better than almost any hitter in the NPB, these are qualities that have defined his career and earned him an enormous amount of admiration from fans, teammates, and opponents alike. When he was named to the Samurai Japan roster for the 2026 WBC, it was seen as not just a selection, but a recognition of everything he had given to Japanese baseball throughout his distinguished career. So when his name was not called for the Miami expedition roster, the impact on Kondo was immediate, visceral, and impossible to contain. According to multiple players who were present in the locker room at the time, Kondo received the news with an initial silence that lasted only a matter of seconds. Then, without warning, he picked up his bat and smashed it with a force and a fury that sent shockwaves through the entire room. The sound of the bat hitting the locker reverberated through the walls, and every player in that room froze instantly. Some jumped back in shock. Others simply stood completely still, not knowing what to say or do. This was not the Kondo they knew. This was not the calm, professional, experienced veteran who had always led by example and handled every setback with quiet dignity. This was a man who had given everything to this tournament, who had been battling through his struggles at the plate with total commitment and determination, and who had just been told that his efforts were not enough to earn him a place on the plane to Miami. The atmosphere in that locker room in the moments after the bat was smashed was described by those present as one of the most uncomfortable and emotionally charged they had ever experienced in their entire baseball careers. But the situation was about to escalate even further. Because while Kondo's reaction had shocked the team, what happened next made everything that had come before seem almost minor in comparison. Shohei Ohtani had been standing quietly at the back of the locker room when the announcement was made. Those near him said that his expression changed the moment the final roster was confirmed, and it became clear which two players had been left out. A deep frown crossed his face. His jaw tightened, and for several long moments he said absolutely nothing, which those who know Ohtani well understood immediately as a sign that something significant was building beneath the surface. Then Ohtani walked to the center of the room. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He pulled back a chair, placed both hands flat on the table in front of him, and looked directly at the coaching staff members who were present. What he said next has since been described by multiple sources as the single most powerful and startling statement ever made by a player inside a Samurai Japan locker room. "If they don't change the decision, I won't play again." The room went completely silent. Not a single person moved. Not a single person spoke. For several long seconds, the only sound in that locker room was the distant noise of the stadium outside, completely indifferent to the crisis that was unfolding within these walls. Ohtani meant every single word, and everyone in that room knew it. To understand the full weight of Ohtani's ultimatum, it is essential to understand what these two players mean to him personally. Because for Ohtani, this was never simply about tactics, roster management, or baseball strategy. This was about loyalty, respect, and the fundamental values that he believes must define Samurai Japan if this team is to achieve the greatness it is capable of achieving. Ohtani has spoken privately on multiple occasions throughout this tournament about the importance of rewarding effort, commitment, and heart. He has said that a team's culture is built not just in the moments of victory, but in the moments when difficult decisions are made and players discover whether or not their sacrifices are truly valued by the organization. When two players who had given everything to this tournament, who had fought through difficulties, maintained their professionalism, and never once stopped working to contribute to the team's success, were left off the Miami roster without what Ohtani considered adequate justification, it crossed a line that he simply could not accept. In Ohtani's eyes, this was not a tactical decision. It was a message, and it was the wrong message to send to every player on this roster who was giving everything they had in service of Samurai Japan. Manager Ibata, upon being informed of both Kondo's reaction and Ohtani's ultimatum, immediately suspended all other team activities and called an emergency meeting with his senior coaching staff and team officials. The meeting lasted for nearly 2 hours, and by all accounts it was one of the most intense and difficult conversations that any of those involved had ever participated in. Ibata sat at the head of the table with the weight of an impossible situation pressing down on him. On one side was his commitment to making decisions based purely on performance and tactical judgment. On the other side was the reality that his team's greatest player, the man around whom Japan's entire WBC campaign was built, had drawn a line in the sand and was waiting for a response. Those with knowledge of what was discussed in that meeting say that Ibata listened carefully and seriously to every perspective offered by his staff. He asked detailed questions. He reviewed his reasoning for the two omissions. He considered the impact that both maintaining and reversing the decision would have on the team's unity, their preparation, and their chances of success in Miami. And then, after nearly 2 hours of deliberation, Manager Ibata made a decision of his own. He stood up from the table, straightened his jacket, and walked directly to where Ohtani was waiting. He sat down across from him, looked him in the eyes, and began to speak. What passed between them in that private conversation has not been fully disclosed. But what is known is that when it ended, Ibata walked back to his coaching staff and told them that adjustments would be made to the Miami expedition roster. He then faced the cameras once more, and with a quiet but unmistakable regret in his voice, he addressed the situation directly. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "The decision has been reconsidered." The news that the roster had been adjusted spread through the Samurai Japan camp almost instantly. The reaction among the players was one of relief, unity, and a renewed sense of collective purpose. Players who had been sitting in silence, uncertain and unsettled, began to reconnect with each other. The tension that had gripped the locker room since the original announcement began to slowly dissolve. Kondo Kensuke, upon hearing that the decision had been reversed, sat quietly for a long moment with his head bowed. Those nearby said that when he finally looked up, his eyes were red. He said nothing for a long time. Then, very quietly, he simply said, "Thank you." And across the room, Shohei Ohtani, who had started all of this with 4 words spoken over a table with his hands pressed flat against the surface, allowed himself the smallest and most restrained of smiles. Not a smile of triumph or of personal victory. A smile of relief, because for Ohtani, this had never been about winning an argument or asserting his power over the organization. It had been about protecting the people who deserved to be protected, and making sure that Samurai Japan traveled to Miami as a truly united team. Samurai Japan will now head to Miami carrying something that cannot be measured in statistics or rankings. They carry the knowledge that when their leader was tested, when the values of the team were challenged, Shohei Ohtani did not look the other way. He stood up, he spoke out, and he refused to move until what was right had been made right. The knockout rounds of the 2026 World Baseball Classic await. The competition will be fierce, the pressure will be immense, and every single game from this point forward will push Samurai Japan to their absolute limits. But after everything that happened in that locker room, after the bat that was smashed, the table that was slammed, and the ultimatum that changed everything, one thing is absolutely certain. This team is going to Miami together. And together, there is nothing they cannot face. Thank you for watching. If this story shocked you or inspired you, please leave your reaction in the comments section below. Share this video with every baseball fan you know, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single story from the 2026 World Baseball Classic. The best is yet to come.